Good morning, good afternoon, good night. Depends upon where you are in the world because we are an international presentation. This is Captain Bill Gustin with Miami-Dade Fire Rescue Department for this month's edition of Operations Humpday Hangout. And it's been quite a ride since we spoke last, both for our brothers in Houston and for our brothers here and in the Florida Keys. Our brothers up the west coast of Florida. We've been in a world of hurt. I mean, I'm inconvenienced. I've got no electricity and no water. That's an inconvenience. Actually, finally, my lack of personal hygiene and Spartan lifestyle paid off, so I'm fine. No water, no air conditioning, and no electricity. I'm fine, considering how much suffering and hurt there is out there. And what really touches me, everybody, is that I've heard from brothers in Houston that have lost their homes, and I've heard from brothers throughout the United States and around the world checking up on me. And if there's anything that ever is good about something that goes bad, it's that you do find out how many people love and care about you. So, and that is really touching. I want to thank our sponsor, Key. It's keyfire.com. We're going to talk about strip shopping centers today after we examine our hurricane response. But the operation 2.5-inch hand lines weighs very heavily in a strip shopping center or commercial fires. None of us have the amount of personnel that we would like to have that would be ideal. So when you're operating a 2.5-inch hose line, you want to get the most bang for the buck in terms of flow capability. In other words, minimal friction loss and maximum mobility with minimum kinks. And you cannot go better than the Key combat ready 2.5-inch hose. Additionally, there's a lot of controversy in the fire service right now about the use of a Y, supplying 2-inch and 3/4 lines off of a 2.5-inch trunk line. Whether I'm in favor of it or not is immaterial. There's a lot of departments that are doing it, but I can tell you, if that's your plan, if your plan is to supply 2-inch and 3/4 hand lines off of a 2.5-inch trunk line, you better have 2.5-inch hose that has minimal friction loss because you're asking a lot of it. So again, you can't go do better than the Key Combat Ready. So a little bit about myself. This is my 39th year at Miami-Dade. And before that, I began my career in the Chicago area with the Wheaton Fire Department, and then a couple of years with Naperville, 20 miles west of Chicago. So we're going to introduce each other, or introduce ourselves, I should say. And then we're going to talk a little bit about the hurricane, and then we will get into the topic at hand, which is the strip shopping centers. So Chief Hoevelmann, could you go ahead and say a little bit about yourself?
Yeah, first thing, we're glad everybody's okay, doing well, Bill. You rode the storm out in a true Spartan fashion. You're doing good, so it's good to see you. I'm Jason Hoevelmann, a battalion chief in Florissant, North St. Louis County, also co-owner of Engine House Training. Happy to be back.
Real good, real good. Good to have you back, Jason. And let's while we're in your part of the world, the heartland, let's give a shout out to our bald-headed brother Sam Hittle. Sam's not with us today because he is celebrating his anniversary. I don't know what year it was, but he's celebrating his anniversary. So Sam, happy anniversary to you. 21st anniversary. Happy anniversary to you and your lovely wife, Sam. And don't worry, as I already told you, I have a feeling this topic is going to go on for at least one more month. So Sam, the input that you gave us was excellent, and we will And 21 years he's married. 21 years he's married. Ironically, the same number of years as inches of his height.
Love you, Sammy.
That is so, we bust his stones when he's here, and then he's not here. We still bust his stones. Hey, Daryl, a little bit about yourself, brother.
Hey, how are you guys doing? Good morning. My name is Daryl Liggins. This is my 24th year in the fire service. I'm a captain in the Oakland, California Fire Department. And prior to coming to Oakland, I was a engineer, firefighter in the Redwood City Fire Department, which is a suburb of San Francisco.
Oh, it's great to have you back, Daryl. Great to have you back. And I know you guys have been burning that city down. No shortage of fires in Oakland. And Assistant Chief, is it Assistant Chief now, Dan Shaw?
Deputy
Chief. Deputy Chief. So I know you've been off a couple of months, and we fully understand your responsibilities. So thanks for making it today, Dan. But a little bit about yourself.
Good afternoon. Great to be back. Great to be back with you guys and discussing tactics and talking about the job. But as Bill said, my name is Dan Shaw. I'm a Deputy Fire Chief of Operations for A Shift in Fairfax, Virginia. I'm also co-author of 25 Survive and Vice President of Traditions Training. So just looking forward to a great conversation with some great collection of colleagues here.
Well, great. I'm very proud of my department. My department really stepped up and met the challenge. And during the planning, the execution phase, and now we're in a very, very busy post-hurricane phase. And to tell a little bit about our operations for Hurricane Irma, I've got Captain Mike Posner, who's been on before. He's a captain with our training division, and he's going to explain our response prior to, during the hurricane, and the calls that we are dealing with now.
All right. Good afternoon, everybody. Give you a little synopsis of how this went down. South Florida started feeling the effects of the hurricane on Saturday, September the 9th. And our fire chief had put out a memo for canceling all leave at this time. Crews that were relieved of duty that morning had to respond back to the stations by 12 o'clock. So essentially we had all our stations were doubled up with crews. Since 7 a.m. on Saturday, when we started feeling the effects, to today, we've responded on 5,178 calls. Eventually we went into no response mode. And on our department, no response mode is when the winds reach a steady 60 miles per hour, our suppression units stop responding. Our medical units stop responding at 50 miles per hour steady. And our medical units are staffed with 2 firefighters, an officer, truck tools, and the such. Our helicopters, we have 2 air rescues that are always in service. They were actually flown to Orlando and kept at the convention center there on Saturday. When we did go into the no response mode, we had firefighters in our dispatch center that were giving medical directions to people that were calling 911, anything that they could give them, from CPR to minor medical advice. After the storm passed, we went back into a modified response, and we had 300 calls we're holding at the time. And the modified response for us is we don't respond on alarm ringings. We weren't responding on wires down. We were just going on these real emergencies. And we conducted callbacks to all of these people that had called during the storm to see if they still needed 911 or the fire department to come respond. If they didn't answer the phone, we assumed that they still were in need of us. So we dispatched a unit to everybody's house that did not answer. It turns out a lot of the times we got there, they just did not have phone service or cell service, and they were fine, or they were just not there at the time. We also placed an additional 8 medical units and an additional 4 suppression units in service after the storm. We've upgraded our BLS fire trucks to ALS when possible to help with the call volume also. As of right now, during the daylight hours, we're responding on 70 to 100 calls, pretty much active at all times, ever since the storm has stopped during the daytime. Staffing's been a real tough issue with us right now. Guys are finally starting to get relieved at home, and guys have been on duty for 3-4 days at a time, and they're getting beat up pretty bad.
And the task force.
Oh, and the task force is actually deployed to Marathon down in the Keys. One of the big issues we're having right now is CO emergencies. Just the other day, we had a CO-related fatality. We had a family of 5 this morning that was pulled out of a CO emergency. The report I got was a couple of them are in critical condition, and we're finding out everybody is running the generators in their houses, which is what's causing this. That's pretty much how the department has been handling it. Like Bill said, I'm super, super proud of these guys, everything that they have been going through and putting themselves through. I also personally would like to thank a lot of friends from Houston that have called me as well and texted me to make sure everything was good with my family and my fire department family. So my brothers and sisters that are out there listening from Houston, I thank you guys very much for checking on that. You guys have enough to deal with on your own. And that's pretty much how it went, Bill.
Well, thanks, Mike. Again, I'm very proud, and I'm very proud of our fire chief, Dave Downey. Once again, the leadership, it starts at the top, and the spirit and dedication was amazing. And I'm proud to be. I'm at the end of my career, but I was very proud to be part of something bigger than all of us. Chief Dan, your folks are deployed. You want to tell us a little bit about what your folks are doing?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, and I share exactly what you're saying, Bill. I mean, I'm immensely proud of our guys and what our fire department gets to do. And it's a privilege that we have the USAR team, Virginia Task Force, too. And, the task force is one of the, I believe, only 2 that get to travel international to go on these missions. So starting back with Harvey, we deployed 14 members of the Swiftwater assets down to Houston to go assist with that. I believe they spent just over a week down there. Those 14 came back within 12 hours. We stood up the entire 80-person team, moved them down to Mobile, Alabama. Then they were quickly deployed to, I believe initially they went to Puerto Rico. We then stood up a medium duty team of about 40 personnel and sent them down to Mobile, Alabama. So as of right now, the last time I checked in, and unfortunately, I have my aide, who's a captain, is actually one of the deployed members, and he was keeping me posted. But they're operating in the British Virgin Islands, Puerto Rico, and then also in the Keys, and then still have some assets back at Mobile, Alabama, at the Air Force Base, just standing by, really, with the opportunity to do it. And really, it's incredible the sacrifice that each one of those members and their families put forth to go out and help, but it pales in comparison to the sacrifice and the loss of the people who are impacted by these storms and these other disasters. And it really is an absolute privilege that we get to go out there, and these guys get to go out there and take the skill they have and help out, brother and sister firefighters, but also the public that are really in dire need.
And I want to congratulate you, Dan, on your promotion to deputy chief.
Oh, thanks, Bill.
In all sincerity, I can't think of anybody more qualified or deserving. But it's great to still have you on. I know sometimes you're not going to be able to make it because of your obligations and responsibilities, but whenever you can make it, you're still part of the core group here.
Love it. Absolute privilege. Thank you.
We're going to talk a little bit about strip shopping centers. Just in terms of terminology, we're going to talk about rows of stores that are with walls in between, or maybe no walls in between. There may be walls in between, but there may not be walls in between in the basement. There may not be walls in between in the attic or cock loft, but adjoining stores. And there may or may not have residences on the second floor. And what I like to do when we examine a topic, a certain fire situation, is ask each of us to relate their most memorable, their most embarrassing, their most horrible, whatever they want to relate. And so I'm going to start by bearing my soul. One of the biggest blunders I ever pulled in my career. We responded on a row of stores with apartments above in the neighborhood where my company was. After hours, every store has roll down gates that are secured with the hidden shackle, American 2000 or hockey puck locks, if you will. Everything is all sealed up. So The report comes in as smoke on the second floor. When I get there, a tenant from a second floor apartment above a grocery store meets me at the apparatus and says, here's the stairway. Go up the stairs, take a left. My apartment is like the third one on the right down the hallway. So what did I do? I allowed a civilian to do my size up for me. So we took a line upstairs, and it was smoky, and we are groping around. This is before ticks, before thermal imaging cameras. We're groping around, and it's getting smokier and smokier. Now we all know where was the fire. Fire was below us, man. I got caught up in the moment. I allowed a civilian to do the size up for us. And what do we all do? We have to eliminate the floor below before we ascend to the second floor. Dan Shaw, in fact, I think, Dan, you're familiar with how DC operates. Am I correct in saying the fire could be on the 22nd floor and they still send a company to the basement?
Yeah, I mean, they're pretty fortunate in one aspect, and nothing can be taller than the Washington Monument. So you don't have many 40, 50-story high-rises in D.C. But, you know, one of the lessons that they've learned and shared with the rest of the fire service from their basement fires and some of the tragic deaths that happen is they mandate a company will always check the basement regardless and confirm that there is no fire in the basement because it's so vitally important, exactly to the point you're stressing.
And ladies and gentlemen, is it conceivable that you could have smoke on the 22nd floor and have a fire in the basement? The answer is absolutely. It is entirely possible. You've got a fire in an electrical panel that extends vertically through bus ducts or cable raceways. You better believe you could have that. So anyway, that was my blunder. To continue a little bit more with this was a near miss for us because of all the roll down shutters being in place, the fire fortunately became ventilation limited. Now this is years before we knew we would call it ventilation limited, but that's in fact what it was. So we were ordered to open up a couple of roll down gates, or actually overhead rolling doors in the rear loading dock. We got the saw started up. We're getting ready. At the time we were using an aluminum oxide blade. We're getting ready to go ahead and cut the slats of this overhead rolling door. And I'll never forget this lieutenant, a friend of mine, John Gardner. Hold it. Shut that saw off. Wait a minute. He didn't have a mask on. He put his nose up against the overhead rolling door and it was ripe with gasoline. Had we cut that overhead door, we would have gotten blown across the street. As it turns out, the guy had like a lawn or garden sprayer, and it soaked all the stock in the store with gasoline. This could have been a big tragedy. And SCBAs are great, and we love it, but it does take away your sense of smell. So anyway, that's my story. I'm sticking to it. Don't let civilians do your size up for you. And do not go above the first floor without checking the basement and without checking the first floor. So anyway, this is what we do. Every mistake where nobody gets hurt or killed is a learning experience. And don't be ashamed or have too much of an ego to explain it to people, because that's how we learn. We learn from our mistakes. Every mistake is a learning experience. Jason, do you have a memorable strip shopping center story for us?
Yeah, it was about 20 years ago. My volunteer department, about 10:30 at night. It was a center occupancy strip mall fire, and when we pulled, it was a clothing store. A lot of racks, pretty big fire load, and I learned two valuable lessons at that fire, and one was that was the first fire that I actually evacuated a company as a young assistant chief in my volunteer department. And it was really predicated on the fact that I had done inspections out there for several years. And I knew that that was a really old building. It has a steel parallel cord joist across it, the underslung type. And it was a really deep-seated fire. It was a wide building. So it was probably 75 to 100 feet wide in the back. And I remember looking at that and checking the conditions, and just something in my gut. I didn't see any color smoke change. They weren't reporting any progress. And we pulled them out. And within about 2 minutes of pulling them out, that entire roof just came down. It was just a steel flat roof built up on. And the fire had been going for a while. And luckily, we did get a good report from the police department. They'd been there earlier in the night for a fire alarm. Didn't see anything from the front of the store. The fire was in the back in a break room on the Charlie side of the building, so they didn't see it. So that fire had a long time to get going and smolder and moving. And it was a real lesson for me, on these types of fires when, number one, we didn't have a lot of resources available to us. We weren't making a lot of progress on that fire, and things weren't moving along. And that intuition, that gut feeling that people talk about, and couple that with the building familiarization that I had with that, we dodged a bullet.
We got to keep our priorities right. Of course, the life safety of the civilians is paramount. In many cases, when you don't have apartments above these stores, if they happen to be one story, the only life hazard is the firefighters. Also, when you get to an early morning hour fire, you got to ask yourself, how long has that fire been burning? Well, it's probably been burning for hours and nobody noticed it. So if it's been burning for hours, why don't we take the time to get all of our ducks in a row, get our companies on the scene, get 2 water supplies, and get our lines into operation. If the fire's been burning to the point that it's ventilation limited, it's going to get a lot worse before it gets better. So before we wake up the angry dragon, let's make sure we're ready for it. So, Daryl, any memorable strip shopping center fires for you?
Yeah, the last one I was on, which is unfortunately a parking lot today. And, when we talk about these types of fires, and we're talking about our failures, we really open ourselves up. But at the same time, there's any fire department that has these types of buildings have had their failures, regardless of their tactics, their aggressive nature, or their staffing. And we're no different. We've had great success with our aggressiveness, but in this one, it was a huge failure. We had a row of stores. Our 1-story row of stores are usually wood frame without not much masonry, if any, because of our earthquakes. And there was a call for light smoke around a store. It was not apparent for the first 2 company which store this haze of smoke they can see was. So a company is forcing entry into a store. But 2 main problems I'll go into were ventilation and forcible entry. And they couldn't find the fire. There wasn't ticks really being used effectively, or the ones that were used couldn't find the source of the fire. So someone found it wise to try to blow out the smoke to find the fire with a fan. I understand what they're trying to do, and I know that a lot of departments may try to do that type of tactic, but the fire was found in a hurry. It literally turbocharged this fire in a hurry. And as lines are getting stretched, doors are getting forced, the fan continued running for a while before someone realized that was there. And I'm coming in on the 3rd alarm. It's out like 5 businesses at the time I arrive. So forcible entry needs to be done, not just at the next store, but well ahead. Another problem with this fire is, although it was a 1-story building, it was on a graded lot. So Sometimes we want to force a rear door, which could be more heavily secured, but try to protect the front of the building, you know, to just not cause the owner damage in case this was just something very, very small. And that opening that rear door ended up being like 2 stories in the rear. So they ended up opening above. So we ended up with some large lines inside, but it was too far advanced going through the entire cock loft and from store to store before you can stop it. And we ended up losing a row of it, about 8 businesses.
How about yourself there, Chief Dan?
No, and much like Daryl, I mean, the last fire I was on just before I got promoted was a strip shopping center fire, middle of the afternoon, very busy area. People were shopping inside the mattress store when they discovered the fire. And it was a relatively small fire, but the fuel load was huge. So you had all mattresses and carpets in a middle unit occupancy in a masonry strip shopping center built in the 60s, early 60s. And, you know, the lesson was learned out. I mean, obviously this fire went very well because of the hard work of the members who were on the hose lines and the truck companies doing the ventilation. But, you know, I had served in this actual first due area as a driver for about 7 years. I was a captain there for a couple of years. So you really think you know your building stock, to take a term that my buddy Larry Schultz uses. And to what Jason's point about knowing your area, and that gut instinct was driven by his knowledge of it. You know, we learned afterwards the occupancy that was 2 down on the Delta side was a restaurant. It seemed like just an innocuous restaurant, nothing to it, but that had about a 30-foot void space that was a drop ceiling to the roof. And in there was bowstring truss. And it was covered by about a 15 to 20-foot facade on the outside of the structure. So fortunately, the firewalls did what they were supposed to, but, you know, one little change. And so one of the things we talk about a lot is that the fire always gets a vote. Could care less about paid volunteer, tall, short, doesn't matter. Fire always gets a vote. And that fire got the vote to go over top of that firewall. You know, the outcome could have been tremendous of us having a fire in that massive void space for a structure that has a bowstring truss. So, you know, the lesson learned out of that was, you know, while there should never words be uttered by anyone in the fire department that I don't know what to train on or I have nothing to do. There's always something to do. Even if it is something that's not as sexy as going out and learning your building stock versus, you know, understanding the deployment of 2.5 hose line versus 3/4, you know, whatever it is, there's always something. And for us, the big one out of that was, wow, you know, you thought we had this. I thought I knew this area really well. And here, you know, the fire department teach me another lesson.
You know, and Jason said that too, that he had spent some time in inspections and he was familiar with the building. You know, in the extreme hot weather in the summer, and we don't have the cold weather here in Florida, but in the extreme cold weather, that's the time to use your training time for things like getting out into the buildings and becoming familiar with them. And it's I think you can break the strip shopping center down to front, the back, and the front could be. We're going to talk about the front and facades, because when you look at the front of a row of stores, it may look brand spanking new, but it may just be a facelift, as we're going to show you here in a few seconds. The rear is a critical area because we want to get those doors open, and you know, especially in an urban area, the rear doors of a commercial occupancy are locked up like Fort Knox. 2 weeks ago, I was on a fire in maybe 3 weeks ago, strip shopping center. We take a line in through the front, took an A-frame ladder with us so that we could get up into the ceiling and see if, first of all, is it a common attic, a cock loft, and secondly, you know, is there any fire up there? So I can hear a saw running towards the back of the store. So we make our way towards the back of the store. From the saw coming through the door, they had put an air handler an air conditioning unit right in front of the back door. And it is not at all, I bet you every one of us has got a horror story about trying to force the back door of a commercial occupancy. And when you get the door finally open, you got storage racks, you got desks, you got drywall, because they don't use that door anymore. So it's really, really tough. The other thing is the roof. You could have, and we've discussed this before, one of the most valuable lessons that any new firefighter can learn is how much fire you can have up over your head and not know it. And I mean, one of the best examples is the Sofa Superstore, where you had a very high ceiling and then about an 8-foot space between the underside of the roof and the ceiling. And the temperatures can be hundreds of degrees hotter than you perceive them down at floor level. And that space can become a reservoir for fire gases. Bowstring truss. Businesses, especially in the front, are notorious for having a high parapet wall with signs on it that obscure the telltale hump of a bowstring truss building. So we need to get a report of the roof, not maybe necessarily on the roof, but somebody's got to take a look at that roof. We got to find out right away. If you've got an old building with a tin ceiling, or a building that has more than one ceiling, indication that you have fire in the cockloft may be from somebody looking at the roof. It's either coming through, or you can check the roof with a thermal imaging camera, but that is going to be one of your first indications. So let's talk about the front of a business. Shannon, let's run those pictures. You can bring the first picture up. Okay, I'm going to keep talking, and let me tell you a little story here. So I'm out and about the other day, going to pick up some beverages. Here we go. If we can just now, how do we enlarge that? I think we just well, okay. Is everybody there looking at the Stop and Save food store? Okay. Can you see it, fellas? Is it up full screen for you, fellas? It is? Okay.
Yeah, Bill, if you just click on the screen, it brings it full screen.
Excellent. Okay. Excellent. So here's a Stop and Save food store, and where I do all my gourmet shopping. And if you'll notice it, this is we're going to talk about these overhang, if you want to call it a cornice, if you want to call it a false mansard, you can call it that. But it provides shade, it provides protection from the rain, and they can either be an integral part of the roof structure itself, in other words, the rafters or the trusses cantilever over the front of the building, and that is actually part of the roof structure. Or in this case, that's strictly a bolted-on facade, and you can see those connections didn't work very well, and as a result, that portion of the mansard fell off the front of the building. No fire now, no fire, just fell off the front of the building. Now, you could imagine what it would be like if you had a fire in this building and you had companies operating portable master stream devices on the sidewalk underneath this thing. So if you've never seen the series of videos by Chief Vincent Dunn on parapet walls, canopies, cornices, it's compelling, and it's a must see. Can we go to the next picture, Shannon? Okay, so the building department came in, and take a look at this. The entire shopping center is in order to stay in business, had to have this shored up. And I'm going to guess that they had to get some engineer to sign off on this to remain in business. But there's your shores all the way down. Let's go to the next picture. I just want to look at this gabled end here. Now, you know, this is a fire gets in this. And how does the fire get in these facades? You have a neon lights with a transformer. You got recessed light fixtures. The neon lights would be for a sign. Or the fire licks out of the front show windows and gets up into the vents in there, and then you got a friggin' wind tunnel on your hands. This, and it's not uncommon at all to have a huge strip shopping center and one common wind tunnel of a Mansard. Can we go to the next picture? Yeah, can you see it's where it's, this is where the Mansard itself, this overhang joins with the original alpha wall. And as you can see, it's starting to come down already. The other thing is, you got to be really careful. If you try to open up these overhangs, you're in for a difficult and dangerous task, because this is typically a T111 plywood, heavy sheet metal, or in this case, a very thick layer of stucco on wire lath. And it is not uncommon, once you make that purchase and get through the wire lath, when you give it a tug, it is not uncommon for that entire soffit, the underside of this overhang, to come down. Next picture, Shannon. Okay, this is basically what we're looking at. Is you got a building that maybe was built 50, 60, 70 years ago, and to give it a facelift, we come in and we bolt a facade on the front of the building. Technically it's called a cornice, but we can call it an eyebrow, a false mansard. It doesn't matter. Now, it begs the question, who bolted it on there? How is it bolted on there? And what is the stability of this? And was there an engineering study done? Look at the eccentric load that you are putting on a parapet wall that is in front of a row of stores. The parapet wall is already unstable because it's not supported, and the weather attacks it from both sides, and it's usually sitting on a lintel beam that is spanning these show windows. So one of the most dangerous places to operate at a commercial like this is right there on the sidewalk, operating a 2.5 or a master stream device. Okay, the last picture, and then we'll continue. Now, as I said, there's two types of overhangs. They're the ones that are bolted onto the building as a facade, and they use carriage bolts or masonry anchors, Hilti bolts. And then there are, for the lack of a better term, folks, a structural overhang, and structural in the sense that the roof structure itself cantilevers over the walls of the building. Now, when you get something like this, it is not necessary at all to have to try to pull the underside of that soffit, because that's part of the roof construction itself. Whenever you have an overhang, be it an apartment building or a commercial, try to find out if it is a structural overhang, which means it's an integral part of the roof structure, or a non-structural, it's just bolted onto the building. If it's structural, don't bust your butt trying to open up wire lath and plaster T111 or sheet metal. Go inside, poke a hole in the ceiling or raise a ceiling tile. Now, you may have some drywall in between the overhang and the inside of the store, but you can punch through that, and that's how you can get in there. The other thing you can do is open up the gabled end at one of these things. The fact that they're not fire stopped is in a sense, is good in this sense that you can operate a stream and shoot down as far as a stream could reach. So that's that. There's two types: structural, non-structural. But just remember that one of the most dangerous places to operate at a commercial that has some type of overhang is right there on the sidewalk. We're past the half. Time goes fast. I want to give a shout out to Key. That's keyfire.com. That's the hose that my company uses. I use it every day, and it's an easy testimony for me. You will not find a finer hose in terms of durability, kink resistance, wear resistance, and flow capability than you will the Key Combat Ready hose. If you're interested in buying some new hose for your department, contact keyfire.com, ask for some samples, go out and intentionally try to kink it, and do your own flow tests. Do your own flow tests and see what type of flows you're going to get. I think you'll be very pleasantly surprised with the flow capabilities. In other words, the minimal friction loss with the Key Combat Ready hose, be it the 2.5 or 1 3/4 inch. So, Jason, can we talk about some of the difficulties that you encounter in forcing entry into the front of a commercial?
Yeah, sure. And most of the time in our area, everything's glass. And so the big struggle for us isn't getting in as much as getting in smart, because the tendency is to just start right away breaking glass on doors. I've been in side strip mall fires when somebody has taken the big windows out, and it was an unpleasant experience, to say the least. But most of our challenge is to get people to do things a smart way, in a methodical, having a little patience, because a lot of the times the front doors are pretty easy to access with the right equipment. You know, a little pull and pulling that cylinder, and you're usually in pretty quick. But everybody gets in a hurry, bust the glass. Now you're scraping hose over the bottom frame with shards of glass. It's not real safe. And now the backside's a totally different story, like you mentioned. But from the front, my experiences have been typically not kind of slowing them down a little bit and opening the door in a smart fashion.
Yeah, it's when you have an area that doesn't have a lot of crime, they usually have some type of aluminum and glass door with an Adams Wright type of I think that's the name, the brand name, Adams Wright. It's a pivoting deadbolt, and you pull a mortise lock cylinder or unscrew it with a channel locks or vice grips. And then you have a lever that has a hole in it that resembles it has the shape of a light bulb. And you use a key tool or a screwdriver and reach down into there and push it. And remember, you move it opposite direction because it's a pivoted deadbolt. Now, this last strip mall that we had in my area, because those locks are so vulnerable, it's not uncommon for them to have some type of cylinder guard. The one that is most common in our area is the brand name Scotsman. So you can't get a lock puller or tool to pull that mortise lock cylinder. Well, when you see that, okay, then you go for your plan B. And your plan B is going to be, you're going to take a flathead axe, tap it in between, tap it easy so you don't shatter the glass, in between the frame and the door, and come in with your metal cutting rotary saw and cut that pivoting deadbolt. You've done the property owner a good solid favor by reducing the amount of damage. You smash the glass, you still got to contend with that crossbar. And I still see firefighters in my own department. I'll air my dirty laundry because everybody makes mistakes. I still see firefighters trying to force an aluminum and glass door conventionally, and it is wrong. It is improper for so many reasons. You're going to shatter the glass. You're going to bend the door. you got a throw of about 1.5 inches of 2 inches of pivoting deadbolt. You're never going to spread that door far enough for that deadbolt to come out of its strike. So, yes, sir.
Bill, just one thing to add to that. I mean, just using the tools we have at our disposal is one of the things that a lot of the guys who I'm fortunate to teach with, and it's one of the practices we implement in Fairfax is, when you get that aluminum style door and you had an Adams Right lock and you're trying to increase that gap in between those two doors so you can get that pivoting deadbolt, we always have the hydroram. And the hydroram put in that space can create that gap that you can cut it. And then second part is, is what you're alluding to is, all right, so if you decide that for some reason you can't defeat that deadbolt and you do take the glass, there's two concerns with that. I mean, one is you've just lost the ability to control any airflow into that structure. So now you have an enormous amount of air that's flowing into there. And then that bar, you're exactly right. I mean, we have a great picture. I wish I had it available. It's in one of our manuals. And the typical fashion is, and our mentality to beat things down is that bar goes across to the doors and they beat down on it. Well, that thing's inserted by 2 screws to go in the back. So what that bar ends up doing, we have this great picture of this U shape of beating it down because they beat until they got tired. Now that opening you created has this giant bar going down versus if you understand how that bar is inserted and you put pressure in the exact opposite way, you can knock that bar out. So, it really is, going back to your point, if you focus on that little tiny bolt, that little throw, and get rid of that, you don't have to worry about all these other things like the window and the bar and everything else. That it becomes a hindrance on the incident, not really an asset for us.
I'm going to pose a question to you, the panelists here. How often do you run into plate glass storefront show windows as opposed to tempered?
I can't really recall the plate glass other than like downtown stores. Most of the time it's tempered or plexiglass is very common for us. And as far as the forcible entry, if I'm going to regress a little bit, and I definitely credit a group of guys out of Colorado Springs, and Irons and Ladders is what they go by. And they use that Rex, it's called a Rex tool. If you go to Firehooks Unlimited, look up the Rex tool. It's a lock puller. I think it's a phenomenal tool. It's my plan A. I know, Bill, you were saying the saw would be your plan B. But what they're showing, the group from Irons and Ladders, is it's the fastest way to get in. It's not a tool to minimize damage. Pulling that lock cylinder, flipping the lock, allows you a faster way in than the time it would take to start a saw, gap the door, cut the bolt. Although it seems faster, it's a much slower process to do that.
Daryl, you are preaching to the choir, bro. Every company on Miami-Dade has the Rex tool. It has made the K tool obsolete. In order for the K tool to function properly, the door and the frame has to be in the same plane. We find, let's say somebody breaks the glass on an aluminum and glass door and they replace it with plywood. You no longer have the door in the lock at the same plane. You can't fit the K tool over it. But the Rex tool, you can come in from the side, you can come in from the bottom, and it is, if you've never seen it, it is it's an officer's tool that has a lock pulling fork on it. It's a phenomenal tool. We pulled locks on car trunks with it as well. We pulled tubular deadbolts as well. Like I say, our plan A is to pull the lock cylinder. If we cannot pull a lock cylinder because there's some type of protective guard, then the next thing is we're gonna gap the door.
And you know, another nice thing about that, if you get in there and it is nothing in the exposure or it was something minor, you can lock the door, leave a note, call the firehouse, and we'll come unlock your business when you arrive. And so you don't have this store just wide open for everybody to come steal the shoes or whatever out of there.
You are so right. What Daryl's talking about is that the lock cylinder itself is held in place with a little brass set screw. So once the cylinder is pulled, and let's say you were checking adjoining occupancies, close the aluminum and glass door, take your screwdriver or your key tool, relock the door. Oh, before you do that, loosen the set screw. Put the lock cylinder back and take the set screw out, relock the door and screw the lock cylinder back in. Now, you're not going to be able to use a key to unlock it, but it's back in place. And by all indications from the outside, the door is normally locked. So good point.
I did not know that. Thanks for teaching me about that set screw. I knew the set screw was in place because I had originally learned to back that cylinder out. But when you try and do that, you're just stripping the lock and it's spinning around because it's stripping the threads. But I didn't think of loosening that set screw to put the cylinder back in.
You really got to watch out with show windows. Our building code went from plate glass to tempered. You had to have tempered in the door and tempered on either side. And, you know, we teach our fire recruits. When you break tempered glass, you break it with a pointed instrument down in a bottom corner. Well, how are you to know that it's tempered glass? You know, you don't know if it's tempered glass. And you know that you can't go to a glass place and order a piece of tempered glass. It has to be manufactured to your specification. So it is very, very tempting for business owners, landlords to illegally replace broken tempered glass with plate glass. Whenever we're breaking show windows, whether you suspect that they're plate or not, you're going to use an extremely long pipe pull. This is no place for a 6-foot hook. No place. And you're going to strike the glass in the upper corner. If you present the point of the pipe pull and it is indeed tempered, it'll break into crystals and it'll fall. But if you suspect it's tempered glass and break it down in the bottom corner and it ends up being plate glass, you've set yourself up with a guillotine, and that, depending upon the size of that show window, it could be 3/8 of an inch thick. And firefighters have sustained. My brother's godfather, Ted Lattice, God rest his soul, when he was on Squad 2 working with my dad, almost had to come off the job because somebody broke a show window and wasn't careful about removing overhead. And it came down like a guillotine and just about cut his hand off. So when you're taking those show windows, you got to take them, make sure they're completely out. Additionally, if you get to a fire, light smoke, you send your companies in with a hose line and hooks. And then the smoke starts getting lower, more pressure, and then you get to the point where it's warranted now to break the show windows. You get everybody out of the store before you break the show windows. Because if there's a fire hiding up in that cockloft, you have just allowed a lot of air to rush in to that building. So I want to talk a little bit about, and I can see that we're going to hammer this again next month as well. I'm at about 155 right now, and we barely scratched the surface. We're fine. Yes. Okay. Because I really want to talk more about forcible entry. Our bald-headed brother, Sam Hittle, has got a lot to weigh in on. I'm anxious. Mike Dugan is on a family vacation, and it's an interesting thing. In the FDNY, Mike will tell you that If it is a fire in a commercial, you have to use 2.5-inch hose. And I don't know about that. I don't know about that. That's a valid argument. But consider this. You're checking in adjoining occupancy. When I check in adjoining occupancy, unless there's a roaring fire, if there happens to be fire up in that cock loft, first of all, we're going to make our first opening right at the front door or the rear door, because you're opening up the damper of a wood burning stove. If you haven't vented that roof, when you punch that hole, you're allowing oxygen to go up into what could be an oxygen deficient or ventilation limited fire up in that cock loft. And it's been several cases where the entire ceiling has come down.
Well, Bill, it seems like the only way to really save this strip mall is the locating the fire and confining it. And so if we're talking about 2.5 or the extinguishment portion, once we get to that point, that's all well and good. But if we are not confining it, we can use all the 2.5 lines we want. This fire is racing through the cock loft and from store to store or down those facades or through the basement or walls. And the 2.5 is a great choice if we have a well-seated fire, but this is one where it's more important to get into the next businesses and get sealing down. And for us, the forcible entry can take, pretty lengthy. You'd be surprised because crime in Oakland is very, very low. You think everybody'd leave their businesses wide open, but but once we get the roll down door open and the scissor gates and the hockey puck locks and all this, we really need to think about getting 2 or 3 stores down from where we suspect the fire and confine it. And then if we could get large lines in the main fire building, that's fine. But really, in the exposure buildings, the 1 3/4 is just going to be a lot better to move and climb up ladders and get into the cock loft.
And Bill, and I would add to Daryl's points. I mean, he brings forth one of the most critical issues we have, I think, in the American Fire Service, argument-wise, is whether we're talking about people in a residential structure, whatever it is hitting it hard from the outside or transitional attack, is we put so much emphasis on the extinguishment of the fire, and we've taken away from the traditional aspects of what we need to be doing, which is to locate the fire, compartment and confine the fire, then extinguish the fire. And that is so vitally important. And as Daryl's pointed out, I mean, that's so important, especially the strip shopping center, is you don't have the reflex time. We don't really have a reflex time when it comes to residential buildings. You walk up, the door's open, you can probably kick the door in, you go find the fire. But if we apply the same tactics to that strip shopping center, it's going to take 10, 15, 20 minutes to force entry, and we're standing idly by as an engine company, we're doing a disservice. We have to locate where the fire is from a good size up, multiple reports from the Alpha Charlie side, and then start putting lines in place to compartment this fire and confine it, and ultimately then be able to extinguish it in the best manner possible. But when we have a mentality that everyone focuses on, I have to extinguish, yes, you do, but let's do all those other things. Otherwise, you're a dog chasing his tail, because the fire always gets a vote. It's going to follow the path of least resistance when it's going left and right down the exposure. So, I mean, excellent point. Totally agree.
All right, we're going to be wrapping it up now. Does any final thoughts there, Dan, for us?
Yeah, I mean, obviously in my capacity now, I don't really bring water or hose to fires anymore. I just bring markers and command boards, it seems like. But, the one thing I would share with from that perspective is, if you have a fire in a strip shopping center, that is, to me, automatically a second alarm. Just because of the sheer intensity of what you have to do. If it's hose line stretches, you're talking about 200 foot of hose. You are actively stretching in zero visibility, chaotic environment. If it's forcible entry, you're exhausting your guys. The sheer complexity of the structure is going to exhaust your resources. And you don't want to be 15 to 20 minutes into the firefight and go, wow, those guys are exhausted. The fire's still growing. Oh, wait a minute, I don't have any more resources here. So if anything, we talk about the strip shopping center fire, because I know, Jason and Daryl can share a lot of the tactical stuff from company officer and battalion chief is, that command perspective. That's one of the things that's really difficult is, pulling yourself away from not being task saturated with all the things that have to happen on a strip shopping center fire, but realizing, that 10,000 foot view of, man, this is going to take a lot of resources, even if it's just the overhaul capacity if the guys do a fantastic job on the first alarm.
I hear you. We've got so much more to talk about. Daryl, any final thoughts?
Well, Dan and I are certainly agreeing with each other. You are bringing hose and ladders to the scene, but he's doing it by having the ability to call that additional alarm. And even in the story I shared where things didn't go as well as we would have liked, I really credit the battalion chief at that scene, because although it was just a light smoke condition, that fire wasn't found. And within about 5 minutes, he called for a second alarm. And it proved that it was really warranted. If the forcible entry we're talking about, the roof work that needs to be done, we have to get people there ahead of time. We can't treat it like it's a residential structure.
Brother, we could have a whole section on relating stories of fires in commercials with smoke showing that ended up being second, third, and fourth alarm fires. It's don't let the minimal amount of smoke fool you. It's the potential you've got to respond to. Final thoughts.
I concur with Daryl and Dan both on what they closed with, and I would only add that, with a sense of purpose and urgency, take some time to make time so that you do it right the first time. It can pay huge dividends down the road. You don't want glass in your hose. You want to put people in the right places, like Dan talked about with confinement. It's one of the biggest problems I've seen on strip malls is it gets so far ahead of us, and we're literally chasing it down the block to keep it in one place. And so, get as many people there as you can from a command perspective, from a tactical perspective. As a company officer, get out and look at the buildings, know what you're dealing with before you ever get the call.
All right, a final shout out to our sponsor, Key Hose. I don't know if I mentioned this last session, but I recently had a webcast on standpipe operations, and the subject came up about departments that do not have pressure reducing standpipe outlet valves. And I asked a friend of mine, Mike Guilfoyle from the Chicago area, is it entirely possible that some of these buildings that do not have PRVs, that they could have static pressures in the 300 PSI category? He says, yes. I said, well, you better make damn sure that the guy on the valve wheel looking at the inline gauge and the guy on the pipe or nozzle are right there talking to each other, and you've got to adjust the pressure with the line flowing, because you're going to be going from 300 static to about 80 residual. And so what we did was we pressurized some Key combat ready 2.5-inch hose at 300 PSI, which what it would be if with the nozzle closed. And I was amazed. I figured this thing would be so stiff it would be like a pipe. At 300 PSI static pressure, that Key combat ready 2.5-inch hose had remarkable mobility. So another shout out, another testimonial for Key Hose. That's keyfire.com. Remember, our brothers and sisters in Houston, the Houston area, Florida's West Coast, Florida's Keys, they're going to need your help, and this problem is not going to go away for a long, long time. So don't forget them. Keep them in your prayers and in your thoughts, and get your wallets out. Get your wallets out and contribute to these funds that help our brother and sister firefighters. Till next month, we'll continue with our strip shopping center examination. I hope you all have a safe month. Take care. God bless you. This is Bill Gustin saying goodbye.